A faded yellow poster still hangs on the door of the barber shop, which depicts the faces of 3 women from Springfield. A screaming headline is printed on top of the poster in bold. Missing in action. In the summer of 1992, Bill Stokes, the owner of the barber shop, when he pasted this ad to the door, made a promise to himself. I told myself I wouldn't take it off until this case was solved. And I was hoping that it would be discovered. Now he's probably going to rot on this wall. The poster on the barber shop is no different from the mass of exactly the same posters pasted all over the Ozark Plateau. Yellow and faded, it reminds people of 3 women who disappeared without a trace from their own home, located in a small quiet area of the 3rd largest Missouri city of Springfield. The missing women were 47-year-old Sherrill Levitt, her 19-year-old daughter Suzanne Streeter, and Susie's friend, 18-year-old Stacy McCall, just a few hours before the disappearance on June 6, 1992. All 3 attended the graduation party at Kickapoo High School, where the girls, smiling, posed for photos and finished thinking about plans for a party that was to take place the same evening. At 18:00, graduation ended at Hammond Susan Center at 19:30. Susie Streeter's friend brings her a cake on the occasion of the holiday. At 20:30, Susie and Stacy arrive at the first party, in the city of Battlefield. At 21:30, Cheryl's friend called her at home. She was changing somewhere. At 22:30, Stacy called her parents at home and told her mom that she wasn't going to the second party in Branson, and would stay the night at a friend's house named Janelle Kirby. On the 7th of June, at 1:30 in the morning, Susie and Stacy showed up at another party in Springfield, where they left around 2 in the morning. After this party, they were going to Janelle's house, but on the way they decided to stop by Susie's at 1717 Delmore Street to see the new water mattress that Susie had been given. This king-size mattress was a graduation gift from her mom. And the Levitts bought this house just 2 months ago. From this very moment, things that are still unclear begin to happen. Something happened in the house between 2:30 in the morning, when, according to police, the girls entered the Streeter house, and 8 o'clock in the morning, when a friend of Janelle Kirby called to decide what time they would go to the White Water Park in Branson. Then no one answered the call. She left a message on the answering machine. At 12:30, Janelle and her boyfriend drove to Susie's house to find her friends, but there was no one at home. By 19 o'clock, Janice, Stacy McCall's mom, drove up to the house to pick up her daughter's things and car. Since then, no one has seen the 3 women. On the 8th of June, the investigation began. The police drove up to the house and began to wait for a warrant to be issued to go inside. By the end of the day, they had time to realize that the matter was serious. The mass media found out about the incident. On June 9th, the FBI got involved in the case. Every single detective from the Springfield Police Department was working on the case. On the 13th of June, the police appealed to the population for help in finding women. Since that day, the police have received more than 5,000 reports about the incident, conducted countless polygraph tests of potential suspects. Among the suspects were friends and family members. The police also searched the surrounding forests and fields of the Ozarks and 21 other states. The house itself could tell little about what had happened. There were no signs of a struggle inside. There was not a single piece of evidence hinting at the commission of a crime. Nothing to suggest that something terrible had happened. The only unusual thing that happened in the house. 3 women disappeared from there without a trace. Being in the house, you get the feeling that something is missing. Something had to be missing. But only they were missing. Tony Glenn, a retired Springfield police captain who handled the case in those years, once said, "Each of the 3 women had their own cars. All of these cars were sitting untouched in the driveway of the house. Sherrill Levitt's blue Chevrolet Corsica was parked under a carport. Susie Streeter's red Ford Escort and Stacy McCall's Toyota Corolla were parked on the ring road, not far from the house. The keys to all the cars were inside the unlocked house. 3 handbags were lying together on the doorstep of Susie's bedroom. It is known that the mother and daughter smoked cigarettes, but their cigarettes were not found in the house. The cake bought in advance, which was supposed to celebrate the graduation, lay untouched in the refrigerator. It was obvious that the girls were going to bed. They washed off their makeup and threw their wet clothes into the laundry basket. The jewelry was on the sink. Stacy McCall's floral-patterned shorts were neatly folded and lay on top of the sandals that stood next to the water mattress. The girl's jewelry was in the pockets of her shorts. The police assume that she left the house that night in only a t-shirt and panties. But here's the question. How exactly she and the other women left the house still torments the minds of police officers, family members, and friends. The police cling to the idea that a certain man, using some kind of trick, for example, pretending to be a utility worker, could warn women about an alleged gas leak somewhere in their neighborhood and thus lure them out of the house. This assumption did not arise out of the blue. The fact is that someone threw a note into the mailbox of a local newspaper, which contained a rough sketch of a residential area, and the phrase, "Pretend to be a gasman and report a gas leak." On the 15th of June, the police decided to check the information that a tramp was seen near the house that night. His sketch was compiled. June 16th. The police published a retouched photo of a Dodge minibus, similar to what was seen near Sherrill and Suzer's house, but on the morning of the 7th of June. On the 24th of June, the police began checking a new trail. A waitress at the George Steakhouse restaurant, one of Sherrill Levitt's favorite restaurants, said she saw 3 women who came in to eat between 1 and 3 in the morning. They came and went together. The waitress said Susie was dizzy. Maybe she was drunk and her mom was trying to calm her down. Thanks to this tip, the amount of remuneration for information about the missing soared from $3,000 to $40,000. Local residents, contrary to the opinion of the police, believe that many more people are involved in this disappearance. According to the police, if other people are involved in this crime, then it could be a kidnapping or a triple murder. And then someone would have blabbed about it over the years. Summer shock. In the summer of 1992, teenagers had long hair in fashion. Girls wore hoop earrings. Metallica's songs were gaining leading positions on the music charts, and the internet was in its infancy. This story shocked Springfield and knocked the entire population of the city out of the calm riverbed called the comfort zone. A full-scale search was launched. Police and volunteers on horseback and on foot searched the fields with tall grass and the southwest of the city. The townspeople began to lock the doors. The neighbors swore to look out for each other. In the churches and houses of the whole mischief, people prayed that someone would notice something. Anything that would help the police solve the mystery of the house on East Del Amor Street. Within a few days, more than 20,000 notices about the disappearance of women were printed out and then pasted on telephone poles, shop windows, restaurants, and at the bus stop. Having no other ideas, law enforcement officers dug up all the anthills, which were initially mistaken for fresh graves. On a tip from the callers, investigators were trying to find at least one clue. The Springfield Police Department certainly made a fuss and achieved the assignment of national-level status to the case. Thus, the police believed that if this disappearance was a serial crime, residents of another state might have some answers. By the end of the first week, the faces of the missing women appeared on the popular American program America from the Bridge, thanks to which 29 calls were received. Another national news program called 48 Hours showed footage of police searches, polygraph tests, and police working with evidence. However, after showing these programs, valuable evidence could not be obtained. Many years later, the detectives who were involved in this investigation, which became one of the largest investigations in the history of mischief, continued to puzzle over this unsolved mystery. Although the priority of investigating the disappearance of these women has fallen over time, the pain of family members who have lost their relatives has not faded. And it was the same as in 1992. Janice from Tumacola, the parents of the missing Stacy, created an organization that is designed to help families whose relatives also disappeared. They continue to hope that one day their daughter will still be found. They swore that they would not recognize their daughter as dead until investigators found Stacy's remains. The Levitt and Streeter families have already recognized Sherrill and Susie as dead through the court. Their relatives decided to take this step 5 years after the disappearance of the women. A fresh look at a case that many believed was improperly investigated due to the fact that the local police chief paid little attention to it. Since the mid-90s, it has officially acquired the status of undisclosed. All the evidence led nowhere. On the 5th anniversary, the Springfield Police Department announced that the attention paid to this case in no way justifies the human and material resources expended. Therefore, it was decided to stop accompanying the case of the disappearance of the 3 women until new leads appeared. If any traces in the case are found to be suitable, they will be checked. If not, they will simply be discarded. However, at the beginning of the 2000th years, when the investigation department was headed by Major Steve A.I. James, the cabinet where thousands of potential clues were stored that had not been studied before was reopened. A.I. James wanted to take a fresh look at the case, and he wanted the work on this case to be resumed. He assigned the work on this case to 28-year-old Corporal Greg Hidgen, and he immediately began combing through old evidence and all sorts of clues. In 1992, when the women disappeared, Greg had just entered his first year of college, and was the same age as the 2 missing girls. Hidden's great dedication and determination, paired with the investigative skills of Corporal Alan Neal, allowed the partners to become the best investigative team. Therefore, the hope of the relatives of the missing women came to life again. The first trace that appeared on the surface, and over which investigators have been working for a long time, was a man named Robert Craig Cox. Although the family members of the missing had a list of 10 likely suspects, Cox took the first line in this list. The police questioned him for the first time in June 1992. However, when he provided the police with a reinforced concrete alibi, he attended church with his girlfriend on the morning of the disappearance. The police switched to other suspects and other evidence, and they forgot about him. Then Cox, who was still at large after escaping the death penalty on charges in another case, was arrested in Texas for theft. His record at that time already included burglary, kidnapping, and murder. The officers questioned him, and the game began. Like the infamous maniac Ted Bundy, Cox was held in the Stark City prison in Florida. He told the police enough to make them think he knew something. But this information was too little to charge him. He told investigators that the women had been dead for a long time and were buried near Springfield. In front of the members of the Greene County grand jury, Cox's ex-girlfriend reported that she lied to the police about his alibi on the morning of June 7, 1992. In fact, Cox didn't go to church with her. He called her and asked her to lie to the police for him. Upon learning of this, officers from Springfield returned to Texas twice to question Cox, but never received any useful information. Cox wrote a letter to the newspaper saying that in the summer of 1992, he worked as a surveyor in the company Semp Conduit Incorporated, which is engaged in the search and marking of underground utilities. I marked almost everything in Springfield. I was doing work in the area of the house where the abduction took place. Cox's words didn't look promising. In addition, the police had other suspects. However, Cox was on the list of suspects from the very beginning, ever since the police got a call from Florida, from a family that knew exactly what the McCalls and the Tweeters were going through. Another grieving family. A few days after the women were reported missing, a woman named Dorothy Zellers was at her home in Dunalon, Florida. She decided to watch some TV. Her attention was attracted by a program that showed three pretty women. And then she heard the presenter's comments about their disappearance from their own home in Springfield. Dorothy immediately thought of her 19-year-old daughter Sharon, full of joy and love of life, who had once been raped and murdered. As she continued to watch the program, Dorothy thought more and more about the man who was imprisoned for the murder of her daughter. At the end of 1978, the Florida Supreme Court overturned this man Robert Cox, the death penalty 3 years earlier. And then he was released from prison on parole. After that, he returned home to his parents. This house was located in the state of Missouri, the city of Springfield. As soon as her husband Charles and son Steve returned from a trip to Tallahassee, Dorothy told them about the missing women in Missouri. What the police didn't know, the Zellers knew, which is why for years they often wondered if Sherrill, Susie and Stacy would ever find Sharon was a happy 19-year-old girl. She wasn't ready to go to college yet, but she was happy with her job at the Frontierland theme park gift shop at Disney World. She must not go to work on December 30th, 1978. But a colleague called her and said he was sick, and the girl happily agreed to replace him. After the work shift, she left the park at 22 o'clock. 5 days later, her mutilated body was found in a sewer. This sewer was located just 100 meters from the motel where 19-year-old Cox stayed with his parents during his vacation. And a few days later, Cox, a soldier who was in good standing in the army, was already interrogated by the police. 10 years later, the Zellers met with him in court. So much time has passed because it took prosecutors a long time to build charges against the man who, a year after Sharon's murder, was named Soldier of the Year. Testimony at his week-long trial showed that Cox returned to his motel room that night with a bloody mouth. A 2-centimeter piece of his tongue was bitten off. Sharon's parents believed that their daughter had bitten it off. In Sharon's car, the police found an imprint of the sole of military shoes. Shoes with exactly the same sole were worn by Cox. At the trial, the nurse said that Cox could not, as he himself stated, bite off his own tongue during a fight. The bite was committed by another person. It was evident from the teeth mark. The prosecutor's office has obtained a guilty verdict, the death penalty. But while Cox was on death row, the Florida Supreme Court decided that the 12-person jury did not have enough evidence to convict him. Therefore, he was released. The Zellers were devastated, angry at the judges who released the man from whom, in their opinion, Sharon tried to fight off that December night. That's why Sharon's father has vowed to keep an eye on Cox, often calling the California prison his parole officer in Springfield, and now prison officials in Texas. Wherever Cox went, or whatever happened to him, Steve always knew it. That's why he knew exactly where Robert Cox was on June 7, 1992. The night the women disappeared. The search for the truth. Springfield police officers checked all the sewage pits around the city. They also searched places known to Cox. They could not ignore the story of Sharon Zellers and the fact that the jury of 12 jurors believed that it was Cox who killed Sharon and placed her body in a sewer pit. Suzanne Streeter and Stacy McCall were also driving home, just like Sharon. They were the same age and also wore long hair. Jim Williams, Sherrill Levitt's father, died in 1997 year. He believed until the last day that it was Cox who killed his daughter and granddaughter. According to the stories, Cox smiled when he talked about this case with the police. It was as if he was playing a game with him. He managed to convince many that he has the answers to all the questions that concern everyone. At the same time, the police were well aware that Cox might not be involved in the disappearance, and was just having fun leading the police by the nose. In the middle of 1997, Cox wrote a letter to the newspaper in which he claimed that during his interrogation in prison, then Sergeant Kevin Root asked him to tell where the bodies were. Cox said he could point out the location of the body to the reporter, but would not do so because the reporter would hand him over to the police, and then he will definitely be put to death. The only thing he said was that the women were dead and buried in the vicinity of Springfield. Cliff Williams goes every few weeks to get a haircut at Bill Stokes' barbershop, which has a missing persons poster on the door. But he never once told the barber that the missing Sherrill Levitt was his niece. A special bond. Suzanne Streeter considered her mom, Sherrill Levitt, one of her best friends. Susie could cancel plans to meet with her friends, just to spend time with her mom. They could talk about anything. They were constantly recording cassettes with their favorite songs and personal messages for each other. I just want to say that I love you. There was a message between songs. That's why it was no surprise to anyone that this couple could order pizza at home and have a little time alone after Susie's graduation, just a few hours before the girl went to the party. Sherrill was the only member of Susie's family who was present at the Hemos UN Center when she received her diploma. After having lunch with her daughter, Sherrill started varnishing a chair and wallpapering in one of the rooms of the house that she had purchased just 2 months ago. Since Susie was going to spend the night with friends at the Branson Hotel, Sherrill had the house to herself. Susie left the house with a slight stomach ache, probably because of the pizza, as she would later tell her friends. A few minutes later, Susie was at her friend Janelle Kirby's house. As soon as the third girlfriend, Stacy McCall, arrived, the three of them went to a party. Sherrill started housework on East Delmer Street. She was accompanied by a Yorkshire Terrier named Cinnamon, and there was a graduation cake in the refrigerator. They planned to eat this cake the next morning. On top of his icing was written, "Congratulations, Suze. Friends forever." Janelle and Stacy have been friends since they were babies. The McCall and Kirby families lived in the Battlefield neighborhood. Janelle's mom often looked after Stacy when she was about 3 or 4 years old. The girls became best friends. We played together and went to the same kindergarten group. In the photos in Janelle's album, the girls are always depicted together. On the faces of both, smiles shine from ear to ear. In the 2nd grade, Stacy and Janelle met Susie, a tall blonde girl with a slight swelling on her chin. Susie was left for the 2nd year of 2nd grade, so she was a year older than her new girlfriends. However, this did not prevent them from becoming friends so much that sometimes they spent the night together at someone's house. The McCalls moved to another state when Stacy was 11 years old. When Stacy came back a couple of years later, some things had already changed. Now girlfriends, as a rule, communicated in pairs. Sometimes Janelle Stacy, sometimes Janelle and Susie. When it came time for high school, Stacy started hanging out with more popular girls at school, and Susie got into a more hooligan company. Janelle had to be torn between 2 friends. However, a few months before graduation, the three friends became much closer. Almost like when I was a kid. Janelle and Stacy still considered themselves sisters. They went together to take the network final exam in high school and celebrated their 18th birthday together. Susie began to appear in their joint photos again, especially at the prom. In a word, the girls were happy and moving forward to an unclear, but still promising future. Stacy and Janelle were planning to enroll at Missouri State University and were considering joining a sorority. Susie planned to follow in the footsteps of her mother Sherrill to study cosmetology. Sherrill worked in a beauty salon called New Hair, and she had more than 250 regular customers. But above all, the girls had a few days of fun, which began on the day of graduation. Even before the end of the official graduation ceremony, the three friends agreed to meet at Janelle's at 8 o'clock in the evening, and then go to the party. From there, go to another city, and finally stay at a hotel in Branson. And visit the Whitewater Water Park the next morning. Sudden decision, Stacy knew that her parents would worry that the girls would go to Branson late at night. Janice and Stu McCall couldn't get rid of the idea that their daughter and girlfriend might die in an accident. Stacy called home at 22:30 and said there had been a change of plans. The girls decided not to take any chances. "We're not going anywhere tonight. We're going to go to Whitewater in the morning. I'm staying the night here at Janelle's," Stacy told her mom Janice. "Call me before you go to Whitewater." "Okay, I'll call you. Good night." Janice immediately calmed down and went to bed. This long happy day has come to an end. The girls got tipsy and went to another party to their friend named Michelle Elder. Stacy and Michelle agreed that they needed to celebrate this event properly. But the party on East Hanover Street was too loud, and the neighbors called the police. The officer arrived at 1:40 in the morning and dispersed the celebrants. Susie and Stacy got into their cars parked outside Janelle's house. Her mom, Katie Kirby, put a cot in the living room for Susie and Stacy. Janelle went to sleep on the couch as relatives from another city arrived who had been allocated a girls' room for housing. Then Susie and Stacy decided that they would be more comfortable sleeping on Susie's new waterbed, and they told Janelle that they would come to her in the morning. Katie Kirby woke up when her daughter walked out the front door. She heard the girls' voices outside. "Follow me to my house," Susie said. "Okay, I'll go," Stacy replied. Janelle Kirby was very curious. She was with Stacy McCall and Suzanne Streeter at graduation parties that night, and they agreed to meet the next day to have fun together at the Branson Water Park. It was almost noon, and her friends had not called. Janelle decided to drive herself to Suzanne's house at 1717 Delmore Street, where she thought they were still sleeping. Jumping out of the car barefoot, the first thing Janelle noticed was the shining broken glass at the front door. The porch light was broken, although the yellow bulb shone brightly in daylight. Someone or something must have touched him. Nothing serious, Janelle thought then. To please Susie's mother, Janelle's boyfriend Mike took a broom and swept away the pieces. Many years later, the police will consider these fragments as one of the most important clues in the disappearance of Stacy McCall, Suzanne Street, and her mother Sherrill on June 7, 1990. However, that day it was nothing more than a misunderstanding that could hurt Janelle's bare feet. While the girl was trying to see the house through the window in the living room, Mike threw into the trash the only evidence that was connected with a kidnapping or a triple murder. A case that still makes the residents of Ozark shudder. The cars of all the missing were parked next to the house. Janelle didn't find anything suspicious in the house. Everything was clean in the living room, and nothing aroused any suspicion. Janelle walked around the house and got into the backyard. Perhaps the friends were there, basking in the sun, because the temperature that day reached 27 degrees. But there was no one there. Janelle and Mike decided to take a better look inside the house. Maybe the friends were still asleep or left some kind of note. Everything is quiet in the house. Janelle knew that Susie had a Yorkshire Terrier named Cinnamon, but she did not hear his barking, and continued to open the front door. Cinnamon jumped into her arms when he saw a man he knew. There was no one else in the house. The girl walked through the living room and kitchen, then went into the bathroom and into Susie's room. Something caught the girl's attention. The bedspread on Susie's bed was pulled down. The room was a bit of a mess, but nothing unusual for a teenager. All three of their purses were still in the house, stacked on the doorstep of Susie's empty bedroom. Susie and her mother Sherrill left cigarettes in the house. It was strange, because both mother and daughter constantly smoked and very rarely left the house without cigarettes. Puzzled, Reginald and Mike drove to their friend's house, hoping to meet Susie and Stacy there before going to Branson. But their friend named Shane didn't see the girls. And in general, before Janelle and Mike arrived, he was sleeping. Then they went back to East Delmore Street. But again, no one was found there. It suddenly dawned on them that Sherrill, Susie and Stacy could have gone to the store to buy themselves something for breakfast. So they hurried to get to the store. But there was no one there. Janelle and Mike checked the footpaths on every street where, theoretically, women could take a leisurely stroll. The guy and the girl were already starting to worry, but they didn't realize yet that the women were missing. They just didn't know where else to look for them. But maybe Janice, Stacy's mom, knew. Call Stacy. After Janice didn't get a call from her daughter by the middle of Sunday afternoon, she called Janelle's house. Sister Janelle answered the call. "Are they awake yet?" The nurse explained that Janelle had gone somewhere with Mike. "Then call Stacy," Janice said. "But she wasn't here," the nurse replied. Janice said that Stacy had spent the night with them that night, referring to her and her daughter's phone conversation at 22:30 the previous day. However, Sister Janelle insisted that Stacy and Susie went to Susie's house. Kirby had a lot of relatives at home, so the girls, in order not to embarrass them, decided to spend the night elsewhere. Janice was a little upset that her daughter didn't inform her about the change of plans, but decided to talk to her about it later. Then she called Susie's house and left messages on the answering machine so that Stacy would call her when she returned. Like Janelle and Mike, Janice was beginning to worry a little, but she didn't show it. The McCall family went to Springfield Lake to watch the boat race, as they had agreed in advance. Janice's mom, Stacy's grandmother, originally from Oklahoma, stayed at home. Therefore, the family could carelessly enjoy a hot sunny day. Janice talked to Janelle, who told her that she and Mike couldn't find Stacy and Susie anywhere. Janice's voice on Susie's answering machine became more and more frantic each time during the day. Her concern was already obvious. The anxiety intensified when a friend called her, the mother of one of Stacy's close friends. "Did you know that Stacy's purse and her car, along with Susie's car, are parked outside Sherrill's house? But the girls themselves are nowhere to be found," the woman asked. The sun began to set. Janice and one of her older daughters got into the car and drove to East Street. They planned to drive Stacy's car home. "I wanted to make her worry about the car and clothes so that she wouldn't find them where she left them and start worrying. Since you didn't warn me, I won't let you know either." "Where is she?" Evening was coming. Large trees around the Levitt house obscured the entrance to the house. Janice searched for the light source and finally found the switch of the desk lamp. She looked around in the small, dimly lit living room and walked through the house. Suddenly, the house began to fill with people. Family, friends, and parents of friends began to enter the small house, asking the same question: where can women be? Janice was pacing around the kitchen, still upset that Stacy hadn't told her where she was going. It wasn't like Stacy, the youngest of her 3 daughters. She was a responsible girl and always told her parents about her plans. Previously, Stacy managed to sneak out of the house, just to find my mom, who was standing next to the apartment building she was going to. Stacy knew her mom and knew that she needed to call constantly. Janice just didn't understand why her daughter was gone for so long. Inside the house were not only the handbags of all 3 women, which contained the keys, but also a large amount of money in Sherrill's purse. There were also some of Stacy's clothes in the house. There were migraine pills in her daughter's purse, without which Stacy would definitely not have gone anywhere. For Stacy, these pills were a salvation for unbearable headaches. The mother of one of Stacy's friends was in the kitchen with Janice. They were going to check Sherrill's notebook and call her friends to find out if the women were going somewhere. Janice started calling everyone, including her former stepdaughter. No one has been in touch with Sherrill lately. Janice called her husband Stu, but he didn't know either. There was no choice but to call the police. However, Janice did not call at 911, but called the police station directly. She asked to write down her data and send an officer. A couple of minutes later, Officer Rick Bookout received a call. The night shift is usually the cop's favorite time to work. Calls are very rare. Officers don't have to worry about traffic jams, and the tasks at night are not particularly difficult. Bookout had just started his shift and immediately heard the crackle of the police radio station. Dispatchers had to send an experienced employee with 3 years of work experience to the address from Delmore Street to accept a missing persons report. When he arrived at the house, the door was open. The light was on. The smell of fresh varnish wafted to him. Bookout thought that someone must have been engaged in the restoration of furniture. There were already several people in the house. Janelle was also there with her boyfriend Mike. They never went to the White Water Park. Instead, they visited a small water park in Springfield called Hydra Slide. Janelle had a swimsuit under her clothes, from which her shorts got wet. First of all, Officer Bookout talked to Stewie Janice McCall. The policeman began to write down the McCall's statements in his tiny notebook. Their youngest daughter, 18-year-old Stacy, came to this house for a sleepover with Suzanne Streeter, a childhood friend. At first, they were not going to spend the night here, but plans have changed. They went here, and in the morning, they planned to go to the White Water Park with friends. They never called their friends about the meeting in Branson, and did not answer the calls themselves, which began at 8 in the morning. Bookout walked around the house, Janice walking beside him. They went into Susie's room. Posters of famous blondes hung on the wall. 7 huge stuffed animals were scattered on the floor. The 2 slats on the blinds were separated, as if someone had pulled them apart to look out of the window. 3 purses were lying together. Stacy's things were on top of Susie's bag. The officer made a few notes in his notebook. The TV was on, the bed wasn't made. It looked like the girls were going to bed. On the floor lay Stacy's floral shorts, in the pocket of which were her rings and watches. Bookout suggested that Stacy could have worn a friend's clothes, but her mom Janice refuted this assumption. Stacy was bigger and wouldn't fit into Susie's stuff. The officer sat down at the dining table, and the McCalls and the rest of those present sat down at him. A small Yorkshire Terrier jumped on his lap. Cinnamon behaved like a madman, afraid of all strangers in the house. Then Bookout really wanted the dogs to be able to talk. More panic, less hope. The second officer who arrived at the scene was Brian Gold, together with a Bookout. They tried to piece together the few facts about this case. 3 women are missing. They left their purses and car keys. The cars themselves are parked at the house. The porch light was smashed. The shards were swept and thrown away. The missing mother and daughter smoked, but left cigarettes in the house. You can leave the house without many things, but a smoker will always take a lighter and cigarettes with him. Therefore, the police immediately assumed that the case was dirty. The officers qualified the case as a missing person and a possible murder. As Janelle Kirby watched the officers work, panic grew inside her. Sitting on the porch steps and looking out at the street, she watched every glare of the headlights, praying that one of the passing cars would stop. Her friends came out of it and explained their sudden absence. But that hope was fading by the second. The girl burst into tears bitterly. At this time, Officer Bookout was talking to Janice, and his next question seemed to deafen the woman. "Can you provide Stacy's dental records?" Her heart was pounding. Then she knew that everything in the house, clothes, cigarettes, and keys, promised only trouble. At the end of the investigative actions, everyone left the house and Bookout locked the door. Janice was startled. Her voice sounded crazy. "How will they get inside when they come back?" The officer tried to calm her down. "To get into the house, they will need to come to the station and give their names." He pasted a small blue note on the front door of the house. It was a standard handwritten message to the missing. "If you are back, please call 864-1810 and let us know." Even before the television cameras and newspaper reporters found out about this case, the Janice of Tumacola had made an agreement. They did not promise never to show their emotions in public. When the cameras were pointed at them, when reporters were writing their notes, McCall was choked with tears. When the public pleaded for the return of their daughter Stacy, they did not go beyond pre-prepared statements. "It allowed me to keep my composure. Improvisation could lead to a breakdown." Stewie Janice signed their agreement on June 8, 1992. By the time they had not seen their daughter for more than 36 hours, and the police had already accepted a missing persons report. The last time they saw Stacy, a majestic, happy young girl, walking out of the door a few hours after the end of her prom. That Saturday night, she was on her way to a party with friends. And so on Monday morning, they persistently showed Stacy's photo to hospital workers in the hope that they would recognize her as a young girl who had come to them without documents. Janice told everyone that her daughter suffered from migraines and that she should take medication from time to time. And having no medications with her, she could decide to go to the hospital. A few days earlier, Janice and her 3 daughters were watching the documentary, The Story of Adam Walsh, on TV. This is the real story of a little boy who disappeared from a department store while he was there with his mother. Faced with the disappearance of her own child, Janice relied on information gleaned from the film. They needed posters of thousands of posters depicting Stacy, Susie, and Sherrill. They had to call the media and transmit photos of the missing so that they could be broadcast to the whole country. And she will have to establish a strong relationship with the police so that the search is deeper, broader, and more thorough. Hard pressure. Sitting at his desk on Monday morning, Sergeant Mark Webb reread the report on the 3 missing women and constantly thought about his 2 daughters. Report number 920-169. Its pages were mixed with pages of other reports of thefts, assaults, and rapes committed over the past weekend. Webb was a 15-year veteran of the Springfield Police Department. He understood that things were bad. 3 people at once cannot accidentally disappear at the same time. It looked like a real case. It's no joke when the department spent a lot of resources a few weeks earlier when officers feared the abduction of a young woman. An abandoned car was found on the campus of Missouri State University. There was a woman's purse inside, and there were signs of a struggle. The department put so much pressure on this case that the then police chief called it tough pressure. And as a result, it turned out that it was staged. The girl made everything look like a kidnapping. She ran away with her boyfriend to California. However, the new report was different from the previous one. Webb handed him over to Captain Tony Glenn, and, after consulting, they decided that hard pressure should be applied in this case. A meeting was called, as a result of which a search warrant was signed. At the very beginning, there is hope. Previously, Janice McCall had no reason to contact the police, but now she had no other choice. What did they find? What is their strategy? How deep are they digging? She's lost. Then she noticed a row of police cars and turned into the station. She was standing in front of Sergeant Webb. Janice knew that at first the police would assume that the women were celebrating somewhere and then they would return home themselves. But she felt in her heart that this was not the case. Her daughter was in trouble. However, Webb said that the case has already been transferred to work. Detective Richard Weather was working on the case. The department was waiting for a search warrant to get into the house. Since there were no signs of a struggle in the house, but only one broken lamp outside, there was no corpus delicti. And the fact that 18 friends and family members were in the house throughout Sunday couldn't help either. The officers knew that time was working against them. With each passing hour, they have less chance of finding the women alive. Wetter stood outside while the commanders waited for a search warrant. The small house was covered with police tape and put under guard. Neighbors began to gather, wondering what had happened to the mother and daughter, who had moved to the area just 2 months ago. Cliff Williams was at his home in a suburb of Stanford when his brother Jim called from Seattle. Sherrill Levitt's father. He was upset. Jim told Cliff about the disappearance and said that Springfield would be coming soon, and also that he would call again if he found out anything new. Then Jim called his daughter Debbie Schwartz, who also lived on the West Coast. It was hard for her to believe what had happened to her sister Sherrill and niece Susie. Sherrill would never let a stranger into the house and would never let anyone hurt Susie. On Monday afternoon, Captain Glent ran into Chief Terry Knowles and his assistant Ron Warsham on the doorstep of the department. They've just returned from a meeting in City Hall. Glenn held another meeting on the missing women case. Although the police received one report that 3 women were seen boarding a plane, detectives knew that the case was much more serious. Late on Monday night, the lights were on the second floor of the police department. Detectives made calls and made up a sequence of events, which was soon to be displayed in front of the chief in the meeting room. Long sleepless nights for them began on the 8th of June, 1992nd year. Almost all other cases were postponed. It looked like a grave. From above, the ground was moist and dark, as if the soil had recently been dug up. Officers Dana Carrington and Ron Hutchison were digging with shovels in a rocky wooded area near Lake Springfield. I received the same call as hundreds of others. They offered to help in the search for 3 women who disappeared a few days earlier. The call looked promising. The long-awaited breakthrough that the police needed. But this trail, like hundreds of others, led nowhere again. In fact, it was not a grave, but a huge anthill. The officers studied all the silly leads. The investigator even flew to Arkansas to check the field, over which a couple of days ago they noticed soaring birds. They followed the guidance of psychics. The police even tried to read tarot cards in the hope that at least one would lead them to the right track. When these actions led to some evidence, any not worthy of attention or, conversely, important, they were collected, labeled, and sent for storage. Among these clues were faded soiled jeans from a garbage can, which, as it seemed to the citizen who reported this evidence, gave off a suspicious smell, as well as a pair of large women's underpants that were floating in Springfield Lake, so big that they could easily fit all 3 missing women at once. Unlike all previous and all subsequent cases, detectives received possible leads from citizens, not from patrol officers. Some blamed it on former police chief Terry Knowles, whom they described as an effective manager who did not allow detectives to do their job. Officers say that the main suspects, who, according to investigators, had motives for abducting women, were excluded by the police chief himself. George Larby was president of the Springfield Police Officers Association in 1992. He said the officers felt that Knowles didn't trust them, and this caused a lot of controversy in the department. During the largest investigation by local detectives, Knowles did not deny that he had a hands-on approach as a boss. He said he wanted more than a briefing. He wanted to know what was going on. But Knowles disagrees with detectives who claim his dictatorial methods undermined the case. Everything is bad. On Sunday, June 9, 1992, Lieutenant Mike Brazel was out of town. He was a newcomer to the investigation department and was on a 5-day business trip. I traveled to the police departments of 5 cities to find out how the investigation departments in other cities work and how they conduct their investigations. His thoughts were often at home in Springfield, where 3 women had disappeared without a trace 2 days earlier. On Tuesday, the 11th of June, the anxiety in the police department was growing. Brazel was familiar with the term hard pressure, which belonged to noose, which implies throwing all resources at the investigation, tearing officers away from other cases. Mike Brazel called Glenn Knowles every day. He was depressed, as was Glenn. Brazel really wanted to be in Springfield. The case was getting bigger and more mysterious. The police understood that Brazel's training was now more important than ever. He was left on a business trip. When he returned home on Friday, June 12th, the day before the officers went on television, and their colleagues on horseback and boats searched for evidence, scouring Greene County, everything changed. Blurred border. The investigators' briefings were held in the police chief's conference room. Daily press conferences were held to inform the media. The FBI joined the investigation of the case. Detectives were warned not to share the evidence with their colleagues. Instead of coming to the department and working on phones, as it happens during a normal large-scale investigation, detectives received notes with suspicions about any suspicious activity. Some were on the phone and had to listen to the baseless fears of the callers. Police veterans sincerely wondered why the authorities were playing such a strange game. Now decisions on the investigation of the case were made in the conference room. The line of investigation was blurred. In fact, what most detectives were specially trained in police academies was cancelled by their current boss. In fact, the talented detectives were now tied hand and foot. But in all other cases, they were given complete freedom of action. A lifelong case in September of 1992, when the 48-hour program was released. Darrell Moore attended a conference of prosecutors. He got himself a TV at the hotel where he was staying because he knew that the case of the Trinity from Springfield would be covered. In the program, he watched videos from all over the city, the beauty salon where Levitt worked, the house on Delmore Street where the women disappeared. McCall put up posters with photos and descriptions of women. Next, the TV showed footage of the 2 suspects passing polygraph tests. Moore wondered how it could be missed on the air. After all, it was a gross disciplinary violation. The police were forbidden even to talk about passing or not passing such a check, not to mention its demonstration on television. In those years, reporters received unprecedented access to the case materials. It was told about almost every detail of the case, including a description of the things that were in the women's room. If the police had a suspect, and this person would be charged. The prosecutor's office was afraid that they would have problems in court. If the defense had claimed police misconduct, it would have been true. And all this was done at the instigation of the chief of police. Police Chief Terry Knowles himself does not agree with the accusations against him. He needed to spread the word, and the media helped him in this. If this was a serial crime, other communities across the country would be able to help. The woman was sure of the green van that she saw on the 7th of June, the day the women disappeared. She was standing on her porch in East Springfield, admiring the sunrise. She noticed an old model of a green Dodge van. The van turned into a neighbor's driveway, driven by a young blonde woman who looked very much like Suzanne Streeter. The girl's face was distorted with horror. A woman on the porch heard a rough male voice. "Don't do anything stupid." The woman was afraid to report it for several days. When she decided to speak, the police were already looking for the Dodge van, either dark blue or gray. One man said that being in the parking lot of a store near the house Levitt, "I saw a van driven by a young blonde. She was waiting for someone who was in the store." The man wrote down the number of the van on a piece of newspaper because he found something suspicious in this situation. However, the man threw away this newspaper. The police conducted a hypnosis session on him, but the man managed to remember only the first 3 digits of the number. The police checked all the vans registered in the United States. A car similar to the description stood in front of the police station for several weeks. The police left it like that in the hope that someone else would remember a similar van and, possibly, the disappearances of women associated with it. To this day, opinions about the van differ. Some officers believe that the van was involved in the disappearance, others doubt it. Both agree that the police had too little information to say for sure. For the sake of families. The pain does not subside, as is the thought that maybe something could have been done differently. And despite the strife of 1992, detectives say they knew who they were working for. For the sake of the families of Susie and Sherrill, for the sake of Janice and Stu McCall, during the first weeks of the investigation, the McCalls sat across from Sergeant Mark Webb and played for him a recording of a public announcement, in which they prayed for the return of their daughter. When the recording ended, Webb struggled to keep his composure. "I remember thinking that these were not the people who stole the microwave," says Webb. "A girl was stolen from them, and they wanted her back. We were responsible for her return. I will never forget how Janice looked me in the eye and repeated, 'You have to promise me that you will bring my girl home.'" As of 2022 year, 30 years after the disappearance, the case is still open, despite almost 5,000 leads received from local residents. Sherrill Levitt's son and Suzanne Streeter's brother Bart Streeter kept a blog dedicated to this case in the 2013 year. He handed over the management of the blog to his daughter named Dee. The mysterious disappearance of 3 women in June of 1992 still remains the largest unsolved mystery of Springfield.